People like you should be serving the wine, not sitting at this table." The sentence sliced across the ballroom like a blade. It was not whispered. It was not hidden. It was delivered with the confidence of someone certain the crowd would agree. And they did. Laughter erupted, crystal glasses chiming, a roar of privilege echoing under chandeliers. Then, with a flick of her wrist, the billionaire's sister tilted a goblet, and red wine spilled in a dark cascade over the head of the only black woman at the table. The liquid streamed down her white gown, soaking silk, dripping onto the linen tablecloth. The sound of shock never came. No one gasped. They laughed instead. One man slapped the table. Another leaned back in his chair, smirking. A woman muttered, "Perfect fit," as if humiliation were entertainment. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we are glad you are here. Now, back to her. She did not move. She did not flinch. She sat perfectly still, shoulders straight, eyes lowered but unbroken. Her silence pressed harder than any outburst could. Around her, tuxedos shimmered, jewels glittered, but dignity belonged to the one in white, even as wine dripped down her arms. The host of the evening, a billionaire in a tailored suit, leaned forward with a mocking grin. "If you cannot handle a drink, how will you handle real business? Perhaps that contract was a mistake." The words carried weight, an open challenge meant to erase her legitimacy in front of every guest. For a moment, the room froze in that balance between cruelty and complicity. A waiter in a black vest lingered at the edge, towel clenched in his hand. His eyes burned, but a sharp look from the host froze him in place. Cameras stayed in pockets. Phones stayed still. Except one. A young journalist near the back had lifted her device low, recording quietly, the red light blinking like a heartbeat in the shadows. The black woman's hands, resting gently on the table, curled once into fists and then opened again. Calm, deliberate. Her stillness was not submission, it was preparation. In that silence lived memory. At 24, she had walked into a hotel lobby in Atlanta after a sleepless flight. Dressed in sweats, reservation confirmed, card in hand. The clerk had looked her over and said, "Not your kind of place." She had spent that night in her car, humiliated, invisible. Tonight, as wine soaked through silk, she recognized the same dismissal dressed in finer clothes. Across the table, the billionaire's sister laughed again, swirling her empty glass. "Do not just sit there. Stand up. Leave before you ruin the party." Guests around her chuckled, nodding. A chorus of approval for cruelty. It was theater, and she was meant to be the punchline. But she did not stand. She did not leave. She lifted her eyes slowly, letting the weight of her gaze pierce the room. The laughter softened. A hush crept between candle flames. Something unspoken shifted, and though no one realized it yet, the balance of power had already begun to tilt. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers and gold trim, yet the air grew sharp, restless, as if everyone felt the storm approaching but chose to pretend it was a breeze. She dabbed her sleeve with the corner of a linen napkin, her movements measured, almost ceremonial. That quiet defiance unsettled them more than shouting ever could. At the far end of the table, a man in a navy tuxedo leaned to his companion and whispered loudly enough for others to hear. "Cheap fabric, cheap ambition. She does not belong in this room." His words carried, feeding the smirks around him. Another guest, a woman draped in diamonds, added with a chuckle, "I thought this was an exclusive dinner. Did invitations go astray?" Their words hit the air like daggers, each one designed to cut dignity into smaller pieces. But she remained still. Her calm was armor. She did not blink. She did not bow. Across the room, the young journalist steadied her phone, the red light now clear. She angled the lens toward the woman in white, toward the wine stains spreading like ink across her gown, toward the laughing faces encircling her. She knew what she was capturing was not just an insult but a revelation. One of the waiters shifted again, his jaw clenched tight. He had seen this before, in smaller ways, in quieter corners of luxury. He whispered under his breath, "Not again." But fear held him in place, fear of losing the very job that paid his rent. His silence was heavy, yet his eyes never left the woman at the table. The billionaire's sister stood straighter, pleased with herself. She tapped her empty glass against the centerpiece and announced, "She should be grateful. A bath in Bordeaux is better than any perfume she could afford. Laughter burst again, sharp and cruel. Then the host himself, her brother, placed his hand on her shoulder and addressed the woman in white directly. His voice was smooth, calculated, dripping with superiority. You came here by mistake. This contract, this dinner, this company, all beyond your reach. Security will escort you out before you embarrass yourself further. It was not just a dismissal. It was a declaration, an attempt to erase her presence as though she had never earned her seat. She drew a slow breath, her chin rising. The memory of past humiliations lingered like ghosts, but so did the knowledge of who she was now. She let her gaze sweep the room, steady and unflinching. The laughter faltered again. A few guests exchanged uncertain glances. The cracks had begun to show, and though they did not yet know it, the next words from her lips would begin the unraveling of everything they thought they controlled. The silence that followed was fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Every eye turned toward her, waiting for collapse, for the tearful retreat they expected. But instead, she lifted the stained napkin from her lap, folded it with precision, and placed it gently on the table. Her movements were deliberate, dignified, and unshaken. The billionaire's sister leaned closer, her smile sharp as broken glass. Why so quiet? Did the cat steal your tongue? Or are you finally realizing your place? Her voice carried, coaxing more laughter from the guests who hungered for spectacle. The woman in white turned her head, her eyes steady on the young sister, and said nothing. That silence felt heavier than words. It pressed into the room, forcing even the cruelest smiles to stiffen. From the back, the young journalist whispered into her phone as she streamed live. They poured wine over her. They are mocking her right now, and she has not said a word. People need to see this. The comments began to flash across her screen, words of shock and outrage from strangers watching in real time. At the edge of the ballroom, the waiter with the clenched jaw stepped forward half a pace. His hands trembled around the towel he held, but again, fear froze him. One look from the host was enough to send him retreating into the shadows. His silence mirrored the silence of countless others who had watched injustice and swallowed their voices. The host's tone grew sharper. He stood, his tuxedo jacket catching the glow of the chandeliers, and declared, "Enough games. You are not a guest tonight. You are a stain on this evening. Security will remove you now." His words were harsh, final, spoken like a verdict. Gasps rippled this time, not from empathy, but from shock at the bluntness. Guests turned their heads, whispering behind their hands. The cruelty had escalated beyond polite mockery into open rejection. The woman in white remained seated, her eyes, calm and focused, lifted to meet his. For a moment, it was only the two of them, the billionaire convinced of his power, and the black woman drenched in wine but unbroken. Her voice finally came, low but cutting. "You have mistaken silence for weakness. That will be your last mistake." The words struck the room like thunder rolling beneath marble floors. The laughter died instantly. Even the sister's smile faltered, her hand tightening on her empty glass. In the shadows, the journalist zoomed in, capturing the shift, capturing the moment when the balance began to turn. And though the crowd did not know it yet, the game they thought they were winning had already slipped out of their hands. The room seemed to contract around her words, every guest suddenly aware that something irreversible had been spoken. The clinking of cutlery stopped. Even the violins in the corner trailed into silence, as if the music itself refused to play. The host narrowed his eyes, unsettled but unwilling to lose ground. He gestured sharply toward the security detail by the door. "Escort her out," he commanded. His voice was louder now, harsher, the confidence of a man who feared his control slipping. Two guards began moving through the crowd. Their black suits cut a path between tables, and whispers followed them like a tide. Guests leaned into one another, murmuring, "Is she really being thrown out? And what did she do besides sit here?" The billionaire's sister smirked triumphantly. She tapped her empty glass against the table, mocking the sound of a gavel. "Order restored," she declared, as if humiliating her guest was justice. But the woman in white did not rise. Her stillness was unshakable, her gaze following the guards without a trace of fear. Then, slowly, she reached into her clutch and withdrew her phone. Her fingers moved with the ease of someone who had done this before, who knew exactly which call to make. She pressed one button and lifted the device to her ear. Her voice, calm and clear, carried through the tension. Initiate Contract Protocol 7. Document everything. Record every word. The words cut across the room. Heads turned. The guards slowed. The sister frowned, suddenly uncertain. On the other end, a voice answered instantly, crisp and professional. Confirmed. The system is live. All interactions are being logged. Murmurs rippled through the guests. Some reached for their own phones, recognizing the shift, realizing this was no longer a simple act of cruelty at a dinner party. This was being archived, recorded, and witnessed beyond the walls of the ballroom. The host stiffened. "What are you doing?" His voice betrayed the first crack of unease. She lowered the phone, meeting his gaze with an expression of absolute calm. "I am reminding you," she said evenly, "that every insult has consequences, and yours will be permanent." The silence that followed was louder than the laughter had been. Guests shifted in their chairs, no longer amused but unsettled, sensing the weight of what was unfolding. One of the waiters stepped forward again, this time his voice audible. "She has not raised her voice. She has not broken a rule. Yet you treat her as if she is less than everyone here." Gasps rose. For the first time, a witness had spoken aloud, and that single voice would not be the last. The waiter's words hung in the air, trembling but undeniable. A ripple of discomfort swept across the ballroom. Some guests avoided his eyes, staring into their glasses as though the liquid inside might distract them from their own silence. Others glanced toward the host, waiting for him to reassert control. The billionaire's sister scoffed, tossing her blonde hair back with a sneer. "Do not play the hero, boy. You are staff. You serve, you smile, and you stay out of grown conversations." Her tone dripped with contempt, each word a lash meant to push him back into place. But the damage was done. The waiter had spoken, and once truth entered the room, it could not be buried again. The young journalist raised her phone higher, whispering into the microphone. "He said it. He defended her. The tide is turning." The host slammed his palm against the polished oak table, his face flushed with anger. "Enough of this nonsense. Security, remove them both. Now." His voice cracked at the edges, power fraying in front of his guests. The guards stepped forward once more, but hesitation slowed their stride. The woman in white had not moved, had not even raised her voice. Her presence anchored the room, and their orders no longer felt as solid as before. She spoke then, calm but firm, her words striking like a verdict. "You called me a stain, you called me an intruder, and yet the only thing staining this room is your arrogance. Remember that when the world sees what you have done tonight." The journalist's phone caught every syllable. Guests shifted again, uneasy, their earlier amusement curdling into shame. A man in a gray suit muttered, "She is right. None of this is right." His companion nudged him to stay quiet, but it was too late. Another voice had joined the rising current. The billionaire's sister leaned across the table, her smile sharp but trembling now. "You think a few words will save you? This is our world. We built it. People like you will always be on the outside." For the first time, the woman in white allowed the faintest curve of a smile to touch her lips. Not mocking, not amused, but resolute. "You believe this is your world. Tonight you will learn it is not." Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering, and in that instant the atmosphere shifted. The laughter was gone. The whispers grew louder. The room was no longer a theater for her humiliation. It was becoming a witness stand, and the trial had only just begun. The ballroom pulsed with unease, the walls themselves seeming to lean in and listen. Every guest could feel the shift, yet the host pushed harder, desperate to reclaim his authority. He rose to his feet, his tuxedo shimmering under the chandelier light, and pointed a finger directly at her. "You will not lecture me in my own house. Guards, take her out immediately." But the guards did not move. They glanced at one another, hesitated, and stopped short. The weight of the moment pressed down on them. Removing her now did not feel like obedience to a command. It felt like complicity in a crime. A man, in a tailored gray suit, one of the investors seated nearby, finally spoke up. His voice was low but carried through the tense quiet. "She has not raised her voice once, and yet you have humiliated her in front of us all. Is this how you do business?" Gasps rippled again. The billionaire's sister's face flushed red with fury. She turned on the investor like a predator cornered. "You would defend her? after she walked in here pretending to be something she is not? The woman in white finally shifted. She lifted her chin and met the sister's glare head-on. Her voice was calm, deliberate, like the strike of a gavel. I did not pretend. I did not deceive. I sat at the table, and you revealed yourselves. The journalist's phone caught every word. Comments exploded on her live stream. Unbelievable. This is racism in real time. Stay strong. The world beyond the ballroom was watching now, whether the hosts wanted it or not. The host pounded the table again, but his command no longer rang with certainty. You will regret this insolence. That contract we discussed, it will be reconsidered. His words dripped with threat, as though her value could be erased with a signature. Her reply came swift and unflinching. Threats are the language of cowards, and tonight, your threats are nothing but evidence. Oh. The waiter who had spoken earlier stepped forward again, this time louder. His voice trembled but did not break. I saw her name on the guest list. I saw the reservation. She belongs here. What does not belong is the way you have treated her. The billionaire's sister's hands shook. She slammed her glass against the table, splintering its stem. Enough! She will not sit at this table another second. But the room no longer echoed with agreement. Whispers of dissent grew stronger. One guest shook his head. Another muttered, "This has gone too far." The balance had shifted. The stage they built for her humiliation was beginning to collapse under their own cruelty, and everyone in the room could feel it. The breaking of the glass stem echoed like a gunshot. Shards scattered across the linen, tiny reflections of rage glinting under the chandelier. Guests flinched, their laughter long gone, replaced by the kind of silence that comes when cruelty has gone too far. The billionaire's sister leaned forward, her voice sharp and venomous. Do you hear me? You are nothing. This table, this room, this entire evening, it is not yours. It never will be. Her words cracked in the air, desperate, almost shrill. The woman in white did not move. She sat as if rooted to the earth itself. Her silence was no longer just defense, it was indictment. Every second she held steady, the crowd felt the weight of their complicity pressing heavier on their shoulders. The host stepped in, his voice firm, trying to recover his grip on the unraveling night. Security! Detain her now. She is no guest. She is a fraud. One of the guards took a step, but before he could advance, the young journalist raised her voice for the first time. That is a lie. I saw her name on the official list. I recorded it before they tried to erase it. She lifted her phone higher, her courage trembling but unshaken. All eyes swung toward her. She was barely 25, her press badge tucked discreetly into her jacket, but in that moment she stood taller than the gilded pillars around her. You can threaten her, she said, voice clear, but you cannot erase what I have already captured. A collective murmur swept the room. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Others stared openly, guilt spreading across their faces. The host's jaw tightened, but the cracks in his composure widened. The sister spat back. Do not believe her. She is just another plant, here to cause trouble. But the venom in her tone betrayed her unraveling. Then came a memory that burned bright in the woman in white's mind. Years ago, in a conference hall in Dallas, she had been told by a senior banker, "We do not do business with people who look like you." She had swallowed that insult, built her empire brick by brick, and vowed never again to let someone else write her worth. Tonight, the same poison surfaced in another face, another voice. But tonight, the outcome would be different. She finally spoke, her voice steady but laced with steel. You called me nothing. You called me a fraud. But every word you have thrown has revealed only yourselves. You are the stain, not me. Gasps scattered across the room. The waiter dropped his towel, unable to hide the tears welling in his eyes. Guests turned to one another, whispering, "She is right." The ballroom no longer belonged to the host. It no longer belonged to the sister. Slowly, inevitably, it was becoming hers. The host's face hardened, his eyes flashing with the desperation of a man watching control slip through his fingers. He straightened his tuxedo jacket and jabbed a finger toward her. You want to call me a stain? You dare? Enough of this charade. Guards, remove her, by force if necessary. The words cut through the room, but the guards did not move. Their hesitation had grown heavier, as though their feet were nailed to the polished marble floor. The authority of the host no longer carried the same weight it had when the evening began. The woman in white remained still, serene even as the chaos rose around her. Then, slowly, She lifted her phone once more. "Activate escalation protocol," she said calmly. Her tone was not raised, but its precision silenced the room. "Record every insult. Flag every command. Notify the board. Effective immediately." On the other end, her assistant's voice came through the speaker, crisp and steady. "Confirmed. Protocol is live. The board is being alerted. Audio, video, and digital timestamps are secure." Murmurs rippled through the guests. Some turned to each other in disbelief. A woman in a ruby necklace whispered, "The board? Which board?" An older man at the far end of the table whispered back, "If it is who I think it is, they are finished." The billionaire's sister scoffed, her smirk faltering. "You are bluffing. You have nothing. This is just a performance for sympathy." The woman in white finally rose from her chair, standing tall despite the crimson stain across her gown. Her presence seemed to stretch across the ballroom, commanding silence. "You believe this is theater," she said, her voice resonant. "But what you are witnessing is evidence. Evidence that will end you." The young journalist's phone captured every frame. Comments flooded her stream. "She is fearless. Expose them. This is history right here." The host's composure cracked. His voice grew louder, harsher, like a man drowning who claws at anything to stay afloat. "You think calling your little assistant changes anything? This is my house, my event, my rules." The woman in white met his glare without flinching. "And yet, your house trembles, your event collapses, and your rules are dissolving in front of your own guests. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because truth has walked into your ballroom and it is not leaving." A hush blanketed the room. The guards lowered their hands. The waiter stepped closer, his voice breaking but resolute. "She is not the one who should be removed. You are." The words fell like a verdict, and for the first time all evening the host had no immediate reply. The air itself seemed to shift, and every guest present knew that the power in the room had just changed sides. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Guests shifted in their seats, the weight of truth pressing down heavier than the chandeliers above them. The host's jaw worked furiously, his rage searching for words that refused to come. The woman in white did not wait. She raised her phone once more and spoke with measured precision. "This is no longer a dinner. This is now a record. Confirm my authority to override the agreement." Her assistant's voice came through the speaker, clear and unwavering. "Confirmed. You hold executive rights over the $3.9 billion contract. One command from you will terminate the deal immediately." The words rippled across the ballroom like a shock wave. Guests gasped. Forks clattered against plates. One man nearly dropped his glass, catching it mid-fall with shaking hands. The billionaire's sister went pale, her painted smile collapsing into horror. "She is lying," she whispered, but no one echoed her. The host's face drained of color. What are you saying?" His voice faltered, the certainty stripped from it. For the first time, the woman in white allowed her gaze to sweep across the entire room, making eye contact with every guest who had laughed, sneered, or stayed silent. "You asked who I am. I will tell you. I am the one who signed your $3.9 billion contract. I am the one who built the partnership you flaunted tonight, and I am the one who decides if it stands or if it ends." A wave of murmurs surged. Some guests leaned back in their chairs, stunned into silence. Others covered their mouths, realizing they had witnessed not a powerless guest, but the architect of the very empire they admired. The young journalist's stream exploded with comments. "She owns the deal. Justice is coming. End them." The billionaire's sister stumbled back a step, clutching her chair for balance. No, this cannot be true." Her voice cracked, fragile and small compared to the cruelty she had unleashed moments before. The host tried to recover, straightening his shoulders, forcing confidence he no longer felt. "Even if you are who you say you are, you would not dare end a contract of that size. It would ruin you as well." The woman in white tilted her head slightly, her calm unbroken. "You mistake me again. You think power is about what you can cling to. True power is about what you are willing to walk away from." The journalist zoomed closer, capturing her face lit by the chandelier. Guests held their breath, waiting. And then she spoke the words that would break the night wide open. "Terminate the contract. Effective immediately." Gasps erupted across the ballroom like a storm breaking against glass. Chairs scraped against the marble floor as guests twisted in disbelief. A murmur swelled, first in whispers, then in open shock. The young journalist's phone trembled in her hands as she caught every angle, every gasp, every horrified glance. On the other end of the line, her assistant's voice cut through the chaos with chilling clarity. Confirmed. The $3.9 billion contract is hereby terminated. Documentation is logged. Notifications have been sent to all board members. The billionaire's sister stumbled backward, her face pale, her earlier arrogance shattered. You cannot do this. You will destroy everything. Her words were thin, desperate, a child's protest dressed in diamonds. The host's face blanched as his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He pulled it out, his hands shaking, and saw the notifications flashing across the screen. His empire was unraveling in real time, and every guest was watching it happen. The woman in white did not raise her voice. She did not gloat. She simply stood tall, her crimson-stained gown glowing under the chandelier, the embodiment of dignity that could not be erased. What you poured over me tonight was wine. What I poured over you is justice. And unlike wine, justice does not wash away. The words landed like a final gavel strike. Gasps gave way to silence, then to the faint sound of hands clapping. It started small, hesitant, from the waiter who had spoken up earlier. Then it grew. Another guest joined, then another. Soon the applause spread like fire, building, echoing through the ballroom until it drowned out the last fragments of cruelty. The host stood frozen, his sister trembling beside him. The empire they thought untouchable had been dismantled in front of their peers, not with shouting, not with chaos, but with calm, deliberate power. The journalist spoke into her phone, her voice unsteady with awe. You are watching history. She just ended their $3.9 billion contract in front of everyone. This is what justice looks like. Every eye in the room was now fixed on the woman in white. No longer the victim of a cruel prank, no longer the target of ridicule. She was the force that had silenced a dynasty with a single decision. And in that silence, the truth was undeniable. The room that once belonged to them now belonged to her. The applause thundered through the ballroom, echoing against the marble columns and gilded ceilings. For a moment, it was as if the walls themselves joined in, reverberating with justice. Guests who had once smirked now stood, clapping with conviction, their eyes fixed not on the hosts but on the woman in white. The billionaire's sister shook her head in disbelief, her voice cracking. Stop this! You cannot just erase us. You cannot. But her cries were drowned beneath the waves of applause and the relentless clicking of phones recording her collapse. The host staggered, still staring at his phone, his empire dissolving in digital notifications. Desperation clung to his voice. This is not final. We will appeal. We will challenge. But even as he spoke, his words sounded hollow, brittle, already broken. The woman in white did not move toward them. She did not need to. Power had shifted entirely. Her assistant's voice came once more through the phone in her hand, calm and precise. Access credentials for both host and sibling have been revoked. Their systems are locked. Their privileges are void. Right on cue, the host's phone dimmed, the screen flickering before going black. He pressed the buttons frantically, but nothing returned. His sister clutched her diamond-studded clutch, searching for her own device, only to find it useless as well. Their power had been severed at its root. Gasps and murmurs rippled again. Guests watched the collapse with wide eyes, realizing they were witnessing not just a humiliation but an execution of authority, carried out with precision. The woman in white finally lowered her phone, her gaze sweeping the crowd. When arrogance meets accountability, there is only one outcome. Tonight, you have all seen it. Her voice carried with calm finality, each word striking harder than any scream could. The waiter who had spoken earlier stepped forward once more, his voice firm and clear now. She told you this would be permanent, and it is. His words landed like nails, sealing a coffin. The journalist's stream buzzed with thousands of viewers, comments flooding in, justice served. This is what dignity looks like. Power without respect is nothing. The billionaire's sister sank into her chair, trembling, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The host remained standing, but smaller now, diminished, his shoulders sagging as the weight of what he had lost pressed down on him. And yet, the woman in white remained unshaken, standing tall amid the ruin. She had not raised her voice, had not lashed out. She had simply dismantled them with truth, protocol, and unshakable dignity. In that ballroom, surrounded by those who had mocked her minutes earlier, she now stood as the only figure of authority left. The ballroom was no longer a place of mockery. It had become a courtroom, and the verdict was clear. The billionaire's sister sat frozen, her glass still shattered on the linen, her voice stolen by fear. The host, once so loud, so confident, stood hollow, his empire stripped from him in front of the very people he had invited to celebrate his supposed dominance. The woman in white let the silence linger. She allowed every guest, every waiter, and every viewer online to feel the weight of what had just happened. Then she spoke, her voice steady, unwavering, and final. You poured wine on me. I poured justice on you. One of these stains can be washed away. The other will remain forever. The words cut through the air, leaving no doubt of their permanence. The applause that followed was no longer hesitant. It rose in a wave, stronger, fuller, echoing from wall to wall. Guests stood from their chairs, clapping not just for her but for the principle she embodied. Phones recorded, cameras flashed, and within moments the world beyond those gilded doors was already watching the collapse of arrogance and the rise of dignity. The young journalist, her phone shaking in her hand, whispered into the live stream, "This is not just a story about contracts. This is about justice. This is about what happens when silence is mistaken for weakness, and how that mistake becomes fatal." Her voice cracked with emotion, but her eyes glowed with conviction. The waiter who had spoken earlier stood taller now, no longer trembling. "She should not have needed to prove who she was," he said loudly, his voice reaching the far corners of the room. "But she did, and in doing so, she proved who they were." His words drew nods from others, a recognition long overdue. The host collapsed into his chair, his phone dead, his empire in ruins. His sister buried her face in her hands, the stains of her cruelty on full display for the world to see. They had wanted a spectacle. They had created one, but they were not the stars. The true center of the room stood tall, her gown stained but her presence immaculate. She had not needed to shout. She had not needed to beg. She had simply revealed the truth, and the truth had dismantled everything around her. With one final look around the ballroom, she placed her phone into her clutch and spoke softly, almost to herself, but loud enough for all to hear. "I do not need to capture this on video. I am the result of it." Then she turned and walked toward the doors, leaving behind a room forever changed, and a world outside waiting to remember her name.